Daily Dodge studio here with Terry Bell for today's community comment on 95.3 WBEV.
Thank you very much, Jake. Our guest today is State Representative Mark Bourne, and we'll be talking about all the things happening in Madison that affect us back here in the district. If you would like to give us a call, you certainly may. The number is 920-887-8585, or you can call us here on the studio line at 885-4446. Mark, thanks for coming back.
Good morning. Good to be here as always.
Absolutely. So, as astute listeners know, you are co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee, which we hear a lot about every 2 years, but also there's work to be done all the time, not just during the main part of the budget cycle.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that the Finance Committee meets throughout the full 2-year session. We don't recess. Next year in March, the Assembly and the Senate will recess and move into the election cycle. But the Finance Committee will continue to meet even throughout the year next year, and we continue to be active now. And some of those things we talked about, I think, last time I was on, that we have the account called the JFC Supplemental Account, where we set money aside for projects that are kind of new ideas that need to be developed so that legislation can run, create that new idea. And then if the governor and the legislature agree upon it to create that program, then the money's there and we can release it once we hammer out the details with the administration. So this week the Finance Committee met, and one of those ideas, I guess, developed enough that the bill passed. And it's what we created was, through the Department of Health Services, a program to help folks, I guess, in a simple sense, like deal with minors at risk or special needs, to make it easier for families can choose to participate in this. And what it does is it creates a database, and maybe you have a special needs child at home that requires special medical attention, or maybe reacts in a very negative way to sirens or things like that. So you can choose to participate for these kids at risk, and the database then becomes accessible to first responders and hospitals and things, that it can help with that treatment of the child at risk. So maybe if it's like the example of, a child that might react very negatively to flashing lights. Well, if a fire or police or something has to respond to that home, the dispatcher can flag that through the information in this database and say, hey, be aware, special needs child may have negative reaction to flashing lights. Doesn't mean that they won't use the flashing lights. They might have to for emergency reasons. But if that's an option, maybe they won't. Or at least they'll know going in, hey, we might have a extra stressful situation here. And so just trying to find ways to help families and when these students are in school, for example, it's easy to work with the school and have them all aware of that. But when you have folks like an emergency room doc or a first responder that may not always interact, this is a way to put things available to folks and help manage things for those minors at risk.
Also starting it's already underway. People in Wisconsin are seeing lower electricity and natural gas bills.
Yeah, this was another one, from the state budget that I was particularly proud of. I'm sure there's more than these three that I'm about to talk about, because there are probably some really small ones too that impact folks in a way. But this is the third significant tax that we've been able to completely eliminate since I've been in office. We eliminated the forestry mill tax on everybody's property tax bills like 8 or 10 years ago. We eliminated personal property tax that was huge for businesses and stuff in the last budget. And now this one, taking the tax off of your home electric bills, is another one where the tax is completely eliminated. It's great to have a little bit more money in families' pockets, and we've been through some tough inflationary times the last couple of years. But I also just think it's great to eliminate a tax. And another one thing that's kind of special to me on this one is the first time I heard about this tax was on this show, on Community Comment.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, someone called in and said, hey, why don't you get rid of the tax on our electric bills? And I said, gosh, I don't know. That's the first time that's ever come up. I guess, to be honest, I never even noticed that there was a tax on my electric bill.
A lot of people don't, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, to take it a step further, there is not a tax on your electric bill for part of the year during the winter months. And so part of the year, there was no tax on the electric bill, and part of the year there was. And now we've eliminated it the entire year. So I heard that on community comment. I went home and looked at my power bill, and there was no tax on it because we were in that window where there wasn't one.
Okay.
And I thought, oh man, that guy must have been wrong or something. I thought he had a good idea that I was going to look into, and he must have. But then a few months later, all of a sudden, the taxes, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. But yeah, at least, and I'm not saying that that's where the idea came from other legislators as well. So it isn't like the idea spawned with it. But the first time I heard about that was from a caller right on the show, and now that tax is gone. So super proud of that. I think it's great anytime that we can eliminate a tax, and glad that that one's gone.
You can actually affect change when you call community comments. So think about that, and we invite you to join us, of course. I had a question, and correct me if this is like way too out of the blue, but in Washington, we have the federal government shutdown happening right now. If this goes on much longer, will you at the state level have to be doing some rearranging or even cutting, because some money that Wisconsin gets comes from the federal budget?
Yeah, it's certainly possible if it went on long enough. Certainly something that's several days or several weeks wouldn't be enough to have a major impact. And, a lot of the stuff that we get from the federal government is pass-through grant type stuff that, maybe this would have been the month that it would have normally come, but it's going to come next month or the following month whenever they figure this out, or it already came in the previous couple months. So at this point, there really isn't any concern. I think if it goes on long enough, it might. I think the biggest concern at that point would probably be that it might delay things. If it's a grant that normally comes through in the fall, that we start, it's like some DOT grant that normally comes in the fall that we start taking applications for. Maybe that process gets delayed a couple months, but for the most part, I think these shutdowns have always been more of just things delay. And, so far, I think the average person hasn't seen much impact in their day-to-day life.
Very good. You're listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back. Stay with us.
This week's Midstate Equipment 95.3 WBEV FF.
comment. Here's Terry Bell.
Thank you very much, Jake. We are joined today by State Representative Mark Bourne of Beaver Dam. If you have a question or comment for Mark, feel free to join the program. You can call us or text us at 920-887-8585 or call the studio line at 885-4446. There was a floor session this week, and there seemed to have a theme, as sometimes floor sessions do. And this time it was housing, and people are in a real pinch. Just even an entry-level house is getting beyond the reach of a lot of people in Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And when we look at some of the data, like about 10 years ago, the median price of a house around $160,000. Now over $330,000 in this state. I mean, that's more than double in one decade. It's really staggering. It's pretty hard for families, especially young families or young people starting out, trying to get that starter home. When I think about the starter home I bought as a young man back in 1999, people buy a new truck now for the price that I paid for a new house, for a new to me house, in 1999. And yeah, it's a long time ago in some ways. I mean, we're not getting any younger, but it's just to think about families having to start out and trying to find that, first home. It's really got unreachable for folks. And last session we tried to impact this, and we put aside I think it was $525 million, did some bills to try to help locals, governments create subdivisions. One of the bills was focusing on like our downtown areas and a lot of those apartments that are above those commercial buildings and stuff, and how we can revitalize those and make that an option for folks. And what we found is, as we were working with builders and realtors and our local government partners, is the legislation that we did, well intended, had too many strings attached or not the right levers to make it work. And so a lot of that money didn't go out in the last 2 years. So one of the key provisions we did this week in the legislature was to work with those local governments and stuff and say, okay, like we still want accountability. We still want to make sure this does what the goal is, but what are the levers? What are the rules we have to change to make these programs function? And so we did more things. Like one example is the local government downtown redevelopment stuff for residential that I was talking about, that bill, it had some really high amounts that needed to be matched. And they said some of our projects aren't that expensive, so can we lower that threshold a little bit so some smaller projects can do these like 2 apartment units above a building and stuff. And we're like, yeah, that's what the goal was anyway. So if our numbers are off, let's, find a way to make that work. Another thing was, we said it couldn't have other government credits involved. So you couldn't use like a historic tax credit or a TIF district. And they said, hey, we want to have all of these tools available to us to make it a full partnership. So we're like, okay, fine. You can mix and match some of those incentives now to make it work. And, the efforts are just to try to find ways for this to be successful, and if not lowering the price, at least stopping the growth of it. It's growing so rapidly, the costs on this stuff. And when you look at, like, there's a subdivision here in Beaver Dam that's developing quite nicely, one of the first residential TIF districts they did here in town. But they use that TIF to help lower the cost of putting the roads and the utilities and stuff in, because when a developer has to include all of that in the cost, and your costs for construction are so high already, and then you're having to pile in all those utility costs and things, it drives the price of these houses, even relatively small type starter home, it just drives it way out of whack for what especially young people can afford. And so other states have done some of these things, so we're trying to model some of that to see, what might be the magic for those partnerships here in Wisconsin, and we're certainly hopeful that it starts to have an impact, because it's a real issue.
And communities have a vested interest in having people own their homes. Yeah,
I mean, it's better for the community, it's better for them, and then you look at like the development, like here in Beaver Dam, for example, with Generac opening recently, and all the growth we're seeing, and especially in our industry and commercial space, bringing, we hope, new people, new workers, new families, but where are we going to put them? And so that's why these efforts are needed. And it got to the point where the cost of this stuff was just outpacing folks' ability, so government had to find a way to be a partner.
You mentioned manufacturing. October is Manufacturing Month in Wisconsin, and you feel that's an important thing to talk about because maybe we don't understand enough about the role that manufacturing plays in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think when I talk to groups, a lot of times they're really surprised to learn that manufacturing is actually the biggest part of our economy here in the state. Everyone thinks about us as the dairy state, and we are, and that's great, and that's important. And ag is huge. Don't get me wrong there. But our economy in Wisconsin is really, I like to say, a three-legged stool, and it's manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. And all three of those are major providers to our economy, but manufacturing is the largest. And I think for folks in this area, maybe they aren't surprised by it because if you look around, we have a lot of, especially metals manufacturing in the Dodge County area and in the 37th Assembly District, and a lot of great family supporting jobs. We have a lot of good initiatives through chambers and schools and stuff to focus on that. And, I just think about in this area, a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be over at Apache for their 50th anniversary celebration. I mentioned Generac earlier. Unfortunately, this summer when they did their grand opening, I was out of state, but I'm looking forward to, I think next Friday, Senator Jagler and I are going to have a chance to meet the folks there and tour that facility as one of the newer manufacturing places here in the 37th Assembly District. So it's always been an important part of our local economy, but it's a huge part of the state economy. And I talked to Congressman Grothman, who represents this area. His district, as he gets in the northern Dodge County, Fond du Lac County, Winnebago County areas, the per capita it has the most manufacturing jobs in the country. Because there's so much of that in that corridor that I just mentioned. There are so many big manufacturers and stuff that it's a major part of our Wisconsin economy. And it's also why then from a state perspective, we look to be a partner there. And when it comes to manufacturing stuff, for the most part, they just want government to stay out of their way, right? And not over-regulate and let them do their thing. But there are some areas that we really focus on, and one of them is apprenticeships. I mentioned I was at Apache a couple weeks ago. And they're one that's a great example of that in this area. There's a bunch of them where they're a really strong partner with the local school district. They get a lot of apprentices in there that have the ability to work for part of their school day, learn those trades, develop those things, get great jobs coming right out of high school because of it. I know the Brewer Metals is another one here in town that has a huge apprenticeship program cooperating. And so from a state perspective, we recognize the importance of that for supporting our manufacturing industry. And for several consecutive budgets now, we've been putting more money into that apprenticeship program because we want to keep making sure that that's a strong program. It's a great opportunity for the students that want to go into those fields, but also a great opportunity for our manufacturers to tap into that next generation of workforce early when they're only 16, 17 already and start getting that training. And so that's been an important partnership from the state, and one that certainly I've focused on the last few budgets to make sure we continue to increase.
And it's a lifetime track that seems to be appealing to more young people. We hear a lot of talk about families reevaluating, 4-year college degrees and that kind of thing that, what it comes down to, as far as I'm concerned, and just a personal note, I teach part-time at a community college, and really what it's all about is, we all want a happy life, and so we got to find the path that gets us there best. And Wisconsin, from what I understand, is a national leader when it comes to supporting apprenticeships. Yeah,
it's super important. And part of the reason that we're so good at it, too, is our tech colleges are super partners in this. They recognize it, and Moraine Park here on a local level has been very good at partnering with our local manufacturers. And so it all kind of works together. The high school apprenticeship program starts them out at one of those manufacturers, but then pretty soon they're at Moraine Park doing some welding certification classes or whatever the case might be, often paid by those local providers that they've started working with, local businesses they started working with in the apprenticeship program. So it all works together so well, and people are finding out that they can get really great family supporting careers and not have all that debt and time invested in the 4-year colleges. Now, that's not to say that we don't also need the 4-year colleges. We need doctors. We need
Yes.
nurses. We need teachers.
Exactly.
But that's not for everyone. And there's also great careers in manufacturing. And so there's the Manufacturing Business Alliance here in the Dodge County area that works with the chamber and and local businesses like John Deere and stuff there, and MEC and some of our bigger manufacturers in the Dodge County area have done a great job of showing students in our high schools like, hey, college is great for some folks, but for some folks, look at this opportunity here. And it's been an important part of our local economy, and those partnerships have been really great to help kids and family identify that and then help grow that next generation of workforce.
Very good. We're talking to State Representative Mark Bourne of Beaver Dam. We're going to take a break for the news, but we'll be right back. You're listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
As the leaves fall,
Bell for more of today's community comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
Thank you so much, Jake. Our guest today is State Representative Mark Horn of Beaver Dam, and we're talking about all kinds of things happening in Madison that affect us back here in the district. If you'd like to join the conversation, why not give us a call or a text at 920-887-8585, or call us on the studio line at 885-4446. And as Mark mentioned earlier, sometimes when you call that line, sometimes you set something in motion that actually becomes law at some point.
Yep.
That's pretty exciting and pretty cool. Speaking of which, then, what have you been hearing from constituents lately?
Yeah, since the budget got done, some of the big key issues that we normally talk about in here, like roads and education and stuff, has slowed down a little bit, and we're always curious to see kind of what the next thing that will become the hot topic. Sometimes you don't know, and this one is a good example of this. Is something I've never heard about or anything about ever in my 7 terms in the legislature. But a few weeks ago, we started getting a couple emails that turned into a couple more, to the point now where I think we might be up to a couple dozen or so, from folks that are concerned because the Department of Revenue started taxing your camper. And this was not something that was done before. It would have been something that would have been kind of a gray area between like personal property and real estate probably, but kind of fell in between. It wasn't taxed, but suddenly there's a new interpretation from the Department of Revenue, and they're taxing these campers that you might have that you would take maybe over to the wild playful goose, I think they call it, over by Horicon, and maybe leave it there for the season and go and enjoy it, several weekends out of the year or whatever. And so we're hearing from these camper owners now of like, hey, like we never were taxed on this before, and all of a sudden we're taxed now. Can you do something about this? What's going on? And it's certainly not anything that the legislature did. We didn't change anything. It was just the Department of Revenue started to interpret the law differently. And so we're working on legislation to address that, because I don't understand. For some of these folks, they've been, going to the campground for the summer in Montello for generations and have these, semi-permanent campers there. And all of a sudden, the government decided to tax them.
Right. Yeah. Well, it just kind of goes against the old, taxation without representation, standard. And I would think that if a new tax was to go into effect, it would have to go through the process.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be. But sometimes you get a new attorney or bureaucrats and go, well, hey, we think this should be applied to this. And all of a sudden, whoa. And like I said, nothing we ever heard about before. We didn't know DOR changed their interpretation until people started reaching out. So, that's the way to get it started. And now we have members that have worked on a bill that hopefully we'll be able to move through and get this addressed. But sometimes you never know what the next issue that you're going to be working on is until you get that contact, and all of a sudden, like, wow, what's going on here? We got to learn about this now. So
for sure. Do you think it would be better to resolve this legislatively than maybe pursuing some sort of resolution in the courts?
I think so, because the thing with the courts is obviously they have some attorney now that's saying you can interpret it this way. I'm sure I can find an attorney to say interpret it a different way, but then you've got to work through that process, which could take years. I'm hopeful that we can get it done this session, but if not, if there starts, if the governor feels that it should be this way and vetoes the bill or something, or we can't move the bill because others in the caucus feel that way, then that might be a path to take, and that's certainly an option. And we've done things both ways in the past. I can think of other things that have come up where sometimes you pursue the legal path, sometimes you don't. I know in not too long ago, a few years ago, some municipalities decided that they were going to start basically applying like a road tax of sorts. They have the wheel tax, which they can do on cars, but some of them started kind of trying to imply like a road tax similar to how you do a stormwater utility. And so if you had like the stores with the big parking lots were paying more, and schools with big parking lots were paying more, and residentials with a driveway were paying a certain amount. And a couple of different municipalities throughout the state started to do that. And I saw that and said, well, wait a minute, that's not a good idea. Like, why? That's like a whole new way to tax, right? Where did they get that power from? And so I was going to run a bill to clarify that that's not within the city's power to do that. But in the meantime, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce filed a lawsuit. And so as we looked at it and we talked to them, we said, well, we think the law is clear here already, and I shouldn't have to clarify with the bill, so let's let the lawsuit work its way out. On this one, we're not as sure. I mean, it's an undefined area. And so the court could say, well, it's not really defined, so let it go. So I think it's better to define this one, and hopefully that's what we'll be able to do.
You recently had a floor session this week. I understand there's another one coming up next week. What sorts of bills are you going to take up?
Yeah, that one's going to focus more on public safety. So we'll have several pieces of legislation on that area because it is, as I think when I was on last month, I mentioned I was taking nominations for the First Responder of the Year. And this is a program we started, I think, 8 years ago. We do it every other year because we're not normally in the fall in the election years, where we recognize a first responder from every assembly district in Wisconsin. So usually 99 either police, fire, EMS providers that get recognized that day. It's a great day in the Capitol. A lot of great public safety folks there and an opportunity to celebrate those individuals, but also all of their coworkers and just the service that group provides to our state. So looking forward to that. Nominations are closed. We have selected. We'll be announcing on Tuesday along with the other 98 reps who will be recognized from the 37th Assembly District. But I'm excited on this one. It's always a great day. I think this one, I'm glad this time that we're going to have a police officer. Priorly, I've recognized 2 firefighters and an EMS person. So this would be the first time that we've had a chance to recognize a police officer. So I think it's good to have a variety across that spectrum. And I think another thing that was special with this one is, we've gotten great nominations over the years. It's always fun to read those letters and how these people have either impacted their community through sometimes a full career, or sometimes it's just a particular incident, like a life-saving incident that a victim writes in about the work that they provided. But this one is the first one that I remember where they got more than one nomination. Usually it's one letter that tells us about this first responder. And this one, we had a couple of people from their community that thought they really needed to be recognized. So that was also something that I thought was special. And so we're looking forward to that, and looking forward to announcing that on Tuesday with everyone else. And I know that, the radio station has always covered those recognitions because it's a real positive thing in the community. So I'm sure you'll, looking forward to you having a story later in the week too on that recognition. And also just, we really focus on that day about mentioning that, yes, we're recognizing one person, but it's really about all these first responders. And this person is an example of the great folks we have throughout the 37th Assembly District as well as throughout our state.
I've been sworn to secrecy, so we'll find out on Tuesday exactly who this individual is.
Yes.
Okay, very good. You are listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge. We'll have more with Representative Mark Bourne right after this break. Don't go away.
Vamos a
And we are getting ready for the last segment for today's community comment on 95.3 WBEV. Here's Terry Bell.
Thank you very much, Jake. We have a few more minutes with State Representative Mark Bourne, so if you'd like to join the conversation, you still can. You can call us or text us at 920-887-8585, or you can call our studio line at 885-4446. Before we run out of time, you wanted to talk about a lawsuit that is filed against Milwaukee County. Get us up to speed on what's going on there.
Yeah, this is something from our recent state budget. We worked with Milwaukee County. There's excuse me. There's no secret that there's some challenges in Milwaukee when it comes to crime, and it's constantly a battle investing in DAs and police department and stuff in these larger cities. And so we wanted to try to be helpful with that and making sure that they're addressing their needs there for public safety, and also that it's not spilling over into neighboring counties and things like that. And so we tried to be innovative and decided to use some money from fines and forfeiture fees. And so right now, the way that works in Wisconsin is half the money from fines and forfeitures goes back to the court to fund that process. And the other half then is the residual money that by the Constitution goes into something called the Common School Fund that supports school libraries. And so we decided this budget to take a little bit more, the Milwaukee County portion of that fines and forfeitures, and put it back into public safety there, an additional amount into public safety beyond what's in the courts now, and fund some prosecutors with it. And the Board of Commissioners for Public Lands that oversees the Common School Fund, they didn't like that because it takes some money out of the Common School Fund and says the Constitution says the residuals are supposed to come here. We think you're taking too much. So Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty picked up a lawsuit for them this week, and for a different plaintiff, I guess a librarian or something, to kind of test that out. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it's a good example of the legislature and Milwaukee County working together to be innovative, to use some money that's brought forward from traffic crimes to fund public safety, which I think is super important, and especially in those larger cities that have more public safety problems. But there's a question about what's the right amount and how much should be going to public safety and how much should be going to this Common School Fund. The Constitution says the residual money, but that's not defined. We certainly feel from a legislative perspective when we made this decision that there's still tens of millions going into that Common School Fund. It's an over $1 billion fund that supports our libraries. We weren't trying to be against that or negative on that. We respect the constitutional need for that. We just think we've set a new amount like the legislature did years ago when they decided the 50-50 split, and the court ruled that that was an appropriate amount. Just cautioned us not to go too far. I think the lawsuit's arguing we went too far. I think we would argue we're still just right. There's still a key investment into public safety. There's still a key investment into the Common School Fund, and it's fine. It's nothing wrong with filing a lawsuit and testing that out and letting the court determine if the legislature still has exercised their power correctly in balancing those two funds, or if it's gone too far, and we'll see how that works out.
We couldn't let you go this time of year without talking about the governor's race. The big news that happened in this past week is that Attorney General Josh Kaul, who is seen by many, yourself included, as probably the likely favorite on that side to be the Democratic nominee, he's going to run again for Attorney General. So it would seem that how does that change the race? How does that change the race without Josh Kaul in it?
Yeah, obviously I was a little surprised by that when we were out at the fairgrounds for community comment in August. I kind of did my early predictions for nominees, and I thought Josh Kaul would be the Dem nominee. I certainly expected him to run. I hope he didn't not run just to prove me wrong on my prediction, but no, I was a little bit surprised by that. Obviously he decided not to run. I think in their really crowded field that has, 8, 9, 10 candidates now, he still would have been a very likely front runner, so he must have decided it just wasn't for him. And with him not getting in, it's almost hard to handicap that race. There's so many people running. Some of them have long legislative records. Some of them have small legislative records. Some of them have really no public record of accomplishments or votes to kind of define themselves. So I think that's going to be hopefully a wide open and very expensive race for them to figure out their nominee from my perspective. I think on the Republican side, though, with Congressman Tiffany getting in here in, I don't know, the last month or so now, I predicted that he would get in back in August. I think he's clearly the front runner now in the polling. We have had another well-funded candidate drop out since then. I think the race is kind of starting to clear for him, and again, folks are trying to consolidate around him. I think that's a good thing. We'll be able to spend the next year talking about him and the Republican vision for the governor's office while the Dems are fighting out their primary, hopefully. And hopefully that, from my perspective, obviously I'd rather see a Republican governor and have someone to work with that's, thinking more the same way about how to move the state forward. And so hopefully that gives us a better opportunity. But time will tell. This will all play out for the next year plus now, year and a month, I guess. But I certainly think that the Dem field is so crowded right now that I just don't see anything besides a long, drawn-out battle to that August primary next year.
Yeah, it seems to be two very different schools of thought. We have one wide open primary, and we have another primary where things are really coalescing. So, is there some risk of maybe, let's say Tom Tiffany is the front runner and the nominee? Is there any disadvantage to being out of the spotlight for so many months?
There can be. It kind of depends on who you ask on some of that too. Some people think that crowded and challenging primaries are really important. Helps define the candidate, helps them be tested more, and there's an argument to be made there. But I think the longer that I've been involved in this, I look at the fact that our primary there in mid-August is so close to the general election that it doesn't give enough time to get out of that primary and really start talking more to independent voters rather than primary voters and really define themselves in a different way. Also, the resources. I mean, it seems like for the Dems lately, their fundraising is unlimited, but man, there's going to be a lot of money spent in that primary, I think, and that's going to be money that they can't spend in the general election then. So I think I'm more of the school of thought that I think it'll be good if we can solidify around a candidate and spend the next year talking about what's important for him and for our state, and him talking to voters about what's important to them and not being focused on a primary. So I think it'll be to our advantage, but you could ask probably 3 pundits and get 4 different answers on this. So,
you mentioned, the role that independents, play. In Wisconsin, independents really decide elections much more than partisans.
Right.
So, does this give Tom Tiffany extra time to talk to independents?
I think so. I think that's the goal. And I mean, obviously, it depends on how he runs his campaign too. And it's not something that I'm in charge of or part of or anything. I'm just viewing it from the outside. But that's what I think his focus should be. And with not having the challenge of the primary and speaking only to primary voters for a while, he's going to have the opportunity to travel the state and talk more to independents and all voters, and that should be to his advantage, I would think.
What about the fact that we're having this conversation? I mean, the election isn't for more than another year. The primary is a little less than a year away. It seems like these campaigns are getting longer and longer, and voters do get a little burned out.
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I think the other thing is, and this should be obvious because obviously my prediction in August was wrong. Everything I said today might be wrong on this too. I mean, it's just anybody's best guess. I mean, I do spend some time, observing this stuff. I do know these folks. I know Congressman Tiffany well. I think he would make a great governor. I certainly enjoyed working with him when he was in the state Senate. We were on the finance committee together and worked on corrections issues and stuff together back in the day. But things could change drastically. I mean, if you look at the last governor's race, if you had asked Tim Michels in October if he was running for governor, he would have chuckled. It wasn't even on his radar yet. 6 months later, he was a candidate for governor. But the discussions didn't really start until after the holidays. So we're far enough out yet that there could be someone else that would be a grand candidate on either side, I guess, that decides they want to run and isn't even in the race yet. I think that's getting less likely on the Republican side. I see a lot of my friends, colleagues, supporters moving in behind Tom Tiffany right now. But there's a lot of time left. Things could certainly change. You could certainly have a legitimate candidate. Tim Michaels was a very legitimate, strong candidate who didn't really get into the race, I think, until April.
So there is still time.
Oh, yeah.
We are, however, not so long on time here on Community Comment. We want to thank Mark Bourne for being with us. It's been an hour well spent.
Good to see you as always. We'll see you next month.
Thanks all for listening. This is Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
Attention high school